republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have
Member Curtis. Here. Member Rosen. Member Bogus. Here. Edwards. Member Brewer. Member Weiss. Member Ridsdale. Here. Member Marion. Member Broyles. Member Good. Chair Loyal. Here. Member Sedlak. Member Cohen. Member Pelfrey. Member Lee. Member Hoffman. Here. Council Liaison McCutcheon. Here. Council Liaison Stevens.
here. Minutes. Oh, hearing none, they stand without revision. Let's check the sound system. We're not. I don't think we're on at the moment. No.
Yep.
Now we are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any public comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to the fourth item on the agenda, the distribution and explanation of the meeting materials. Joe?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you, Chief Loyal. Thank you, members of the Town Center Update team. In preparation of tonight's meeting, Terry Gaston, who I'll introduce to some of you because she may be a new face, Kathy Arnett, and I prepared a number of items for consideration. Principal amongst those items is the third draft of the Neighborhood Edge Transition District. And as the team members will recall, this has been the subject of our last couple of meetings where we spent a great deal of time going through a lot of different discussions about the impact, the finer points of density, the use of an overlay district, and etc. To the benefit of the team members, we even took time in July, somewhat hot and humid evening, to go out and do a tour of the areas that had been included and had not been eliminated at that point. And those two areas, again, are along the southern edge or perimeter of Town Center and on the westernmost edge of Town Center by Pond Road. So that is the principal item. Additionally, we do have two areas, the areas I just described in general, that have been under consideration for inclusion into the boundary of the Town Center. And those two areas, again, have been toured, discussed, and depicted on maps and other information for your all's benefit. A standard in each of our packets is an update of the timeline. And as you can see, you may think at times we're making little progress, but there are more completed items each and every month, and we are on track to conclude what I believe will be the hard work of reviewing the 5 elements before we go out to the public to solicit their opinions. So again, an updated version of our timeline and the successes we've achieved. Per Chief Loyal, our chair, we also have identified the things that have been completed and those primarily that required a vote of the team so as to proceed forward. So again, the last 2 items are more informational in nature, so each of you as team members feel that you're being included in the process, understand where we are in the process, so if you are questioned by a neighbor, a property owner, or anyone, you could at least have this on hand or reference it in the future. As promised, given the staffing situation in the Department of Planning and Parks in an effort to kind of even out the number of meetings an individual attends, Kathy Arnett, who has been with us since the inception of the Town Center Update team, is being replaced, so to speak, by Terry Gaston. Terry's been with the department over 20 plus years, was integral in the development of our Architectural Review Board, and spent many years as a member of the Architectural Review Board team, and understands the architectural guidelines in the town center as well as anyone in City Hall at this time. So we welcome her, and we thank her for her help on this process. Dr. Jones, I have completed that task. If there's any questions, we...
Joe, could you please go over the changes that were made to this document?
I'll do that in a second. As soon
Hearing none, then we'll move to You're introducing the discussion of the Neighborhood Edge Transition District, the third draft dated October 8th.
Well, Ms. Gasting identifies the PowerPoint for me, and we move on from there. I will not waste our time, and I'll start going through them. So again, as I mentioned in my preliminary comments about the packet of information, the Neighborhood Edge Transition District has been the subject of at least 2 months of extensive discussion, and again on tonight's agenda. So this is draft 3 by the Department of Planning and Parks Count. So it's dated October 8th of this year. The blue highlighted text is items that were, the red highlighted text were items that were added at one of the 2 previous meetings. And so from that perspective, what we've done in the transition is reflected in those first 2 meetings by red type or red text. The blue text is the additions that were made between our September to October meeting. And I think I want to spend a little time going through each of them. In the introductory paragraph, the addition is somewhat minor in nature, but I thought it appropriate to add something about the Neighborhood Edge Transition District being on the perimeter locations of the town center area, just so there's a clarity in terms of what we're talking about and why the transition designation fits it the best. Thereafter, sure. It's the exterior. Correct. And I'll, with the permission of the team, I'll define that a little bit better to reflect what Chief Loyal, our chair, just mentioned. Thereafter, the crux of our discussions has been about density in the Neighborhood Edge Transition District. And we've fluctuated between potentially 2 lots per acre to 1 lot per acre to no change, 1 unit for every 3 acres, to a conclusion we reached in September, which was a density of 2 lots per every 3 acres of development site. And so that is the major change in that particular item. So to do just a simple math problem, if you had 30 acres, the yield in the non-urban resident district would be 10 lots. Under the Neighborhood Edge Transition District, you would take that 3 divided into 30, have 10, and then multiply it by 2. So you would double the density from 10 units on 30 acres to 20 units on 30 acres in this scenario as written. The department, Terry, Kathy, and I hope we've captured the intent of our last discussion in identifying this. I do want to draw a note that There is another statement that goes on from the density question, and it basically reads, in addition, a narrow range of potentially compatible non-residential uses such as parks, churches, schools, child care facilities, and civic buildings. And then there's a missing part of the sentence. My thanks to Mr. Curtis. And typically that would say are permitted. Mr. Roughton, who is a member of the Town Center Update team, did draw a question regarding that in particular. Question related to the document does allow for a narrow range of potentially compatible non-residential uses. Is this mandatory or optional, and how would this impact the Ackerley Place proposal? And so, to answer from the department's perspective, and this certainly can be discussed between the team members, it is not mandatory, but optional. As with any project, a development entity can propose a certain number of units, a certain type of land use, or combinations thereof, but ultimately it is measured against the plan, the site, and the design standards and architectural guidelines of the town center. And that is done either through a PRD, a C8, or the underlying zoning district designation. So optional, not mandatory.
Yeah. So, Joe, the current town center requirements, they must provide public space.
Correct.
So that would not necessarily follow what you just said?
Public space is required regardless. And the differentiation would be is that our public space requirements not only require it, they differentiate between public and privately held public space. So regardless of this statement being optional, it is still required via our zoning ordinance. Good question. Thank you. So a couple things here. It's optional, and under the reserve proposal, as described by Mr. Roughton as Ackerley Place, there are 3 existing land use categories from the regulating plan that are designated upon it. The workplace district, the commercial component along Route 109, the neighborhood general district, which is a higher density residential and can even include first floor commercial in a multi-story residential structure, and then the neighborhood edge, which is a single family district of a lower density. So from the perspective of the reserve, the non-residential uses is applicable because it's a carryover from the neighborhood edge district, not the transition only. So would it have an impact? Only if such were proposed and allowed. But it's not, again, mandatory, it's optional. The reserve proposal does include 1 single commercial outlot, and as you know, 133 proposed single-family detached dwellings on individual lots. There is a central park, so to speak, but that will be to the benefit of residents of the reserve, and I do not believe intended for public use per se. So again, I want to emphasize, if this particular sentence creates concerns in the transition district, the team has the authority to modify it, leave it as is, or delete it in its entirety. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I have a question. So the very last part of that says, see permitted land use chart for more details. And so we would be, by creating this neighborhood edge transition district, we would be creating a whole new set of columns. And so what you're telling us is that we could say, in this neighborhood edge transition district, we will allow child care facilities and churches, but we don't want parks. I mean, we have that ability to say that. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we, as we sit here and we're designing this as a group, we can change those things and say we do or do not want those things to be included. Is that correct?
That is my opinion. I think the transition district is an entity or a district that's been created by the collective wisdom and discussion of the team. And I think it can contain components that are found elsewhere in the town center plan or not.
And currently, this is only applying to 2 parcels of land, right?
2 areas of land.
2 areas of land. And they both currently have a commercial aspect on them, right? We've got the one that has the dog park and then the other one that has the kennels, right?
Yes.
So how does that factor into this?
Very well, quite frankly, because in each instance, Happy Hounds, which is on Pond Road in the westernmost edition, is a conditional use permit in a non-urban resident district. So it's residential zoning, and the CUP allows the non-residential activity. The same holds true for Vinrock Kennels on the southern flank of town center boundary. That has a conditional use permit from St. Louis County in the 1970s, but again, non-urban resident district zone property. So the dog that wags the tail is always the underlying zoning district designation. The CUP allows a potential greater use, but a use that's compatible with a residential zoning district.
So if we were to approve this tonight, we would be doing so on the understanding that that sentence would be pending further discussion and the addition of a verb.
Further modification and then final authorization if the wording is satisfactory.
But pending the discussion that Becky said, once we add the column to the list of
yes.
uses.
I think what we'd like to achieve tonight is, and I'm not pressing the team, but to get an understanding if the transition district's here to stay or not, which would then allow us to make the determination on the 2 areas finally.
So Joe, I'm a little confused. So if your explanation of 300 lots, 30 lots, and then divide that and you get 10, and then how do we get the 20?
Okay, so in a traditional non-urban resident district setting, let's say there's a 10-acre tract of land. A developer comes forward and says, I would like to subdivide this and develop it with single-family detached dwellings. We would take the density requirement, which is a minimum of 3 acres per unit, divide that into 30, and you end up with 10 available lots. Under the language that's being proposed in the transition district, what we're saying is that the density cannot exceed a total of 2 units for every 3 acres. So again, we would start with dividing the 3-acre minimum into the 30 acres, and we end up with 10. But in this case, you can have up to a maximum of 2 per every 3 acres, so you double it.
Okay.
And that's where we end up with 20 instead of 10.
So that's basically an acre and a half.
Exactly. We tried that language in one version of the draft, and it seemed more confusing. So this is kind of what the culmination of our discussion from the September meeting was, maybe trying it this way.
Vicki?
Well, I'll wait until you go to the rest of that.
Oh, you're welcome.
So again, Miss Lindsay makes a very good point. The one sentence that talks about compatible non-residential uses needs to be completed, and you'll see that complete sentence in final form. At our next meeting, we hope, at least from the department's perspective, to show you that list of permitted uses and begin that discussion that evening. So we're kind of working our way through the regulating plan components, the addition of areas that met the edge transition district, the permitted uses, and then finally any other changes to the regulating plan.
So if we were to create the neighborhood edge transition district, it doesn't necessarily have to be applied to those two properties, right? Or would it, like when he was saying, you know, the exterior perimeter or interior perimeter, could it be either? So like, could we apply it to like, so rather than expanding the size of the town center, if we wanted to accomplish getting a transition zone, could you just not take like that western half of the Ackerley Place plus that little finger property on the northwest corner? That could be a transition district. Or the couple properties that are behind the daycare center over there on Old Manchester. Like, could we put those as the transition district rather than adding to the town center?
Yes, nothing that's being proposed is what I would consider mandatory, adding 2 areas as we've discussed, or just adding 2 areas and using the transition district only there. I think the team has the authority under its recommendation powers to basically say yes, no, or this or that.
Okay. So if it's important to have the transition zone, it doesn't necessarily have to be adding to the size of town center. We can transition from the inside.
And I think the discussions we've had in the course of the last few months, we've talked about, does the transition start on existing properties inside the boundary, or do we do it on new properties added to the boundary? And I think the conclusion was, at least, we're heading toward using it only on new properties added into the boundary. But that doesn't mean the team can't say, no, that's a direction I think isn't appropriate, and I'd like you all to consider this.
I'd recognize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So what I want to clarify is, further to what Niles was saying, we are voting on 2 separate items. One being whether or not this is something we want to add, and the other being whether or not, actually 3 things. Second being whether or not the properties are added, and then the third on whether or not this should apply to those properties should they be elected to be added to the town center. So just for the sake of clarity, we're not voting automatically that this should apply necessarily to anything, only that it should be created.
That's my understanding too.
Yes. I believe the chair, the facilitator, and I all agree. I think that's on point.
Steve?
I was going to actually say the same thing, just to clarify what I had heard. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I agree. First, the question is, do we recommend the creation of this transition district? Then secondly, you look at any property, whatever it might be, but we have 2 in front of us tonight. But I guess my position is that I would only recommend adding them to town center if the owners would accept being, part of a transition district.
I think that's why we decided it's important to address that first.
Right, absolutely. But that means we've got to be careful, particularly if we were to divide up the property in the way that was described a moment ago. We got to be careful to word everything precisely, all right? And I am assuming that the owners need to be amenable. I go back to what I've said before. You've always told us that you checked with the owners to see if they were amenable to being in whatever it was. So I would be looking for, assuming we were to approve this, that we would then recommend property X be admitted to town center with the caveat that it be part of the transition district and that the ownership accepts that.
Joe, did you have a response?
I would just say that that could be done in the form of a motion at some point during this meeting or a future meeting.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I just had a point of clarification. Neighborhood edge and neighborhood general. what's the density of those? Because density seems to be the big issue here. So I just want to make sure we understand if we're going from 2 houses per 3 acres. Unless somebody else had them, I was looking through my materials and I didn't see them. Can you go over that real quick?
In principle or theory, the neighborhood general could allow up to 11 units per acre of residential type activity. In principle, the neighborhood edge could allow up to about 6 to 7 units per acre. In the cases where the neighborhood edge has been applied and developed in town center, it's usually been more in the range of 3 to 4. Just a couple more things. Under building types, which is the second category, it was brought to my attention by Ms. Gragnani, a member of our Planning and Zoning Commission, that it does reference residential lots may include a secondary residential unit over the garage or in a detached accessory structure. So for the purposes of clarity and transparency, the intent here wasn't to add density. It's a standard line. It's a standard line that is included in many of the residential districts in the regulating plan of town center. But as a transition zone, you may want to consider eliminating that and just having the primary residence at the density as prescribed, no more than 2 for every 3 acres.
But the change.
Yes. Yeah, what we've done is, so 20 years ago, people used to drive cars. Nowadays, most people drive trucks or SUVs. And so when we did some analysis and research, garages are getting larger and larger in size. And so we took what we believe would be a reasonable footprint, and that increased the size by 50 square feet. So the other discussion point that we had at our last meeting was a desire to have the boundary dimensions, the width and depth, as set, so to speak, so as we would guarantee an acre lot if a PRD was not utilized. So as you can see in the third section, lot width now speaks to 150 feet minimum. And then the lot depth is at 300 feet minimum. And if you do the math, it's slightly over an acre in size. So those are minimums without the benefit of the PRD. And if the PRD is used, we continue to create a minimum, and that was 90 feet for the width, which is typically a 3-car garage with a single-family dwelling, and 165 feet of depth, which gets us very close to a minimum of a 15,000 square foot lot for the purposes of the transition district, if utilized.
Vicki?
Okay, so I probably should know this, and I don't, so I apologize now. I don't know what that means as far as when you're talking about the feet. So I got the point where you said 150 by 300 feet, and you said that's around an acre lot. And then if a PRD is used, it goes down to 165 by 90. So it's roughly half, right? Mm-hmm. So it's about a half acre size?
It's actually a little less than half acre size.
Okay, so I am not trying to be, I guess I thought that the confusion or where we got hung up last month was some of us didn't want the lots to be less than an acre in size no matter what. And so that's my question. I understand the reason. You did a great job of explaining why we need the PRD sometimes, you know, with the trees and such, especially on the ridge on that one property. But this kind of is, in my mind, it's still kind of muddied the waters like it was last month, where we have one instance where, yeah, they're going to be 1 acre, but if we use the PRD, then they're no longer 1 acre lots. The density hasn't changed, but the
Correct.
lot size has. And I think that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that was where we were having trouble last month, was some people didn't, not only did they not want the density, they did not want the lot sizes smaller. So I'm going to throw that out there. Go.
Following up on Vicky's, to kind of put this out there, is the concern the actual lot size, or is it the size of the house relative to the lot size, or the distance, therefore, between the houses? So, if you have a half-acre lot and you have a 0.4-acre house, the houses are still going to be very close together. So what I would like to ask the committee is the concern the distance between the houses and the amount of, for lack of a better word, yard space, or is it the actual size of the lot itself?
Relative to,
Deborah's next, and then they, Vince.
Yeah, well, I think following up on that, the discussion I remember is a density issue, and that we didn't want a lot less than an acre in size. So if you use what's described here and then you use a PRD, we're gonna end up with a lot that is under an acre, and that's what I thought we did not want to do. Is that where you were going, Vicki?
Some people wanted just the density.
Let me, go ahead, Dick, I don't mean to interrupt.
That was when I left here last month, that's what I thought we were able to, that's where everybody bumped ahead. So I just want to make sure that when we get done, that we have what we want.
Let me suggest to the team that Joe go through and explain what is here and clarifying questions. Then somebody introduces it as a motion, seconded, and then we go back through and talk about whether or not you want to amend portions of it at that stage. You're going a bit back and forth between, explain this to me, and do we want to do this or not? So, Deborah, I don't know if that changes whether or not you're okay with your comment now, or?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, the consensus was
Okay.
no less than an acre.
No, and then let's have that debate after Joe has explained. Go ahead, back to you, Joe.
Well, Dr. Jones and Mr. Chair and members of the team, thereafter, the changes that are incorporated in the neighborhood edge transition district are ones that have been discussed and included from earlier meetings. So in terms of additions from the September meeting, the lot width and lot size were the last that were discussed. And so from that perspective, we can now move on to what would be the next step in our discussion process.
Facilitator again suggests somebody make a motion to approve. You're not, that does not bind you to approve it, just to get it on the table.
Also move.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that the team approve the motion, the draft 10th October 8th proposal. Discussion. Yes, Jim?
I guess, oh, well, I'm sorry, which?
Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
I think there's only one of.
So that motion and second would also include the fact that missing part of that permitted land use sentence would be added?
Yes.
And tell me again, what would be added that are permitted? Is that what you were saying?
If there is not an amendment that's on the floor to eliminate the sentence or to restrict the compatible non-residential uses, it would read as is till its conclusion that civic buildings are permitted.
That would be the addition, are permitted.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank
You
you.
wouldn't add but optional?
We could certainly do that, sir.
Is that okay with the team in terms of that understanding of that sentence? Okay. Yeah. Niles?
So just to clarify, on the lot size, you go anywhere from PRD at 1/3 of an acre up to no PRD needed up to 1 acre, right? It's basically we're looking at a range of lot sizes with this district.
Correct.
Do you, I guess, need that big of a range in order to accommodate a PRD, or could you go from a 1/2 acre to an acre, or does the 1/3 of an acre, does that need to be the starting point in your opinion to be able to put a plan together,
Well, and again, it wasn't that I was being lazy, but in a suburban residential area that's been part of our master plan since the inception of the city and its adoption in February 1996, we've always allowed a greater density. At one point, 2 units per acre, then now 1 unit per acre. And the dimensions we've always used is around 15,000 square feet. It seems to be a good number that's been tested over 20 plus years. You can go into subdivisions like Windcrest Addition, Woodcliff Heights, Wycliffe, and you can pretty much see what you're getting. And it's, I think, fairly appealing, and it preserves the portions of the site that need preservation. So I was using that experience, and certainly my intent wasn't to circumvent the conclusion of our discussion, but when Kathy and I discussed, there were some that wanted the flexibility in lot size, and there were some that just wanted the 1 acre lot size. And so what we chose to do is, with a lack of clear consensus, to give you the option, and you can pull those out or add to them or leave as is.
And also the Planning and Zoning Commission will determine that lot size. So whether if they see a PRD come through, they can determine whether or not the 15,000 square feet is too small, and they can increase it or from there as well, right?
Certainly. And I think again, from the department's perspective, and I know this isn't universally held in the Wildwood, the PRD allows you to be selective in what you end up authorizing. So it fits the site, it fits the character of the area where the site is located, and most importantly, from the perspective, it gives you the flexibility to say no if something's bad.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, it does say, Joe, make sure I get this right, minimum, right? So, no smaller than. Doesn't mean that the PRD couldn't be more than, right?
Certainly.
This is just the bare minimum, and again, as Mike pointed out earlier, the density is still going to be 2 per 3 acres.
Vicki?
So, in my opinion, since I'm hoping that we go forward, in my opinion, the PRDs are necessary, especially if we are looking to apply it to these 2 properties, because they both have large areas where the one where the kennels are has that whole ridge of tree lines that really is not buildable, right? So you would need a PRD over there. And then the other one that is over off of Pond Road, that whole back part, right, didn't you say it goes down quite a bit, and there's trees there, and that would be kind of difficult. And so I think, I don't know the measurements, so I defer to your expertise. And so, but I think that this would be fine. And so if I had a choice, which I do, my choice is to approve this as it is.
Niles? Deborah? Then Michael, then...
So, on the minimum building height for primary buildings, you've got 3.5 stories. Why is that not 3?
We assumed a walkout, which calculates at a 1/2 story.
Okay. And I'd like to amend the motion. Yes. So I would like to, I'd like to amend the document to say that the minimum lot size is 1 acre. You can, so that's the very minimum is 1 acre. No.
Deborah's approach, and there seems to be a fear amongst us here. We are cool development. If you stick with the minimum draft, say a lot smaller, can't have any more than 2 homes per 3 acres. Facing it. But it also allows a developer to come in and create infrastructure at a more economic play. In other words, 1 acre might push the home further away. The owners of the property are going to have to buy sewer. And the idea here is to create green space and create transition to non-urban. So PRD, PUD is the tool to make that happen. Protect slopes of the topography, we protect trees. We do a lot of things, not have just dollar bought for something that we need. So we let the site dictate on, let the developer come in and create something. And we have a lot of green space, and we do what the goal is all. So I want to just try to hope everybody understands this, because if they don't do that, then they can just basically carve this all up in square path, 1 acre site, and destroy the whole topography. Nature. Having the tool is good.
What's the current density for like the Pond Historic District and the Cultural Institutional for housing?
As you know, in the Cultural Institutional Overlay District, we have the Meadows of Wildwood, which ultimately ended up with about 50 units, 52 units on approximately 20 acres. So roughly 2.5 units per acre. In the Pond Historic District, there is really no set density. Much is driven in that location by the availability of sanitary sewers. That area is not currently served by a public entity like MSD, so there's a septic system requirement. The lots have to be larger in size to accommodate the septic system. And so in that area, I would venture to say, notwithstanding the legal non-conforming lots that are grandfathered, the minimum size out there would have to be near 1 acre.
Yes, Lindy?
Just for the sake of comparison, Joe, like Chesterfield and Cherry Hills are not in the town center, but what is the density there?
Those were R3, so for all intents and purposes, they reached the maximum under the R3, which was about 4 units per acre. And they did that through a combination of the garden condominiums, the townhouses, and then in the very southern end of the project, like in the case of Seven Villages or Cherry Hills, they have a 3-acre density. So it's a real combination, but at the end of the day, it's about 4 units per acre.
Question of clarification about the motion. As I heard it, the motion to approve this draft proposal. We need to be more precise. We're recommending the creation of a new category as part of this plan, right?
Yes, sir.
We need not to say that. And and that we support this proposal as the definition of what that new category. Am I making sense?
Well, certainly we can provide greater definition in the minutes that reflect the upcoming vote if it is held. But I think from the perspective of the department, by recommending approval of the Neighborhood Edge Transition District, that'll set into motion several things. The creation of a new category on the map, a creation of a new column on the permitted land use activities, and the insertion of this in the neighborhood design.
So those are automatic.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Jim?
I don't want to get too technical here, but I think I heard Vince make a comment associated with that very first sentence with a exterior or outside, whatever the right term should be. So we need to make sure that in the motion that also is added if everybody, Vince, because you brought it up. I just want to make sure that we got all the potentials changes into the motion. So Vince,
can that be a friendly amendment to add the adjective external in front of perimeter?
Except
No.
except that it's the provision, it's part of the purveyance of this committee or this team to decide which uses are permitted where. And it's a subsequent task to the creation of this. So whether or not it's interior or exterior is due to the application of this district, which is the next task of this team.
Right, and well, and also if the Pond Historic District does get sanitary sewers or something in the future, they could always use this neighborhood edge transition district.
Correct.
As well. So that's why I would say don't confine it to just outside the town center, the current boundaries.
That point, because I know Dan had referenced Ackerley Place or the reserve, and if we made it extra, then we wouldn't be able to make it applicable to that if we would choose to do so. So maybe what we do is just leave it as you originally had it at the perimeter.
And allow the interpretation to occur as we work through the next steps in our process.
Deborah?
Two comments. One, we've been working on the Erosion Committee. So if we take this as is, what impact on erosion do you think that's going to have?
Well, as we're finding, regardless of the density of development, such as on Fox Creek Road, which has a mix of minimum 3-acre lots all the way up to 30, 40, and 50-acre lots, if we continue to get storms as we had in August and early September, any use of the land is going to create a potential increase in stormwater runoff. The hope here is that through the standards that we've included in terms of site and lot, the requirements that we apply from MSD, and the knowledge that we are facing a changing, let's say, climate, that we need to be more cognizant of it as we work through proposals at the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council.
And then, can you give me an example of the development where there are detached garages and secondary residence?
We do have a few secondary residences in the non-urban area. There are very specific requirements associated with them in terms of single utility connections, not multiple, a single drive off the street, structural connection between the primary and secondary. In town center, we do not have detached garages in association with a rear entry, nor do we have any accessory structures, accessory residential units in association with it. It's just not something that's caught on.
I was reading this at home earlier. In the garage, front facing.
Mm-hmm.
Can we change that to say side facing? Or can we add side facing? Oh, here it is. Very first line of last page. Garage parking shall be accessed from either a front driveway or a rear alley or lane. So I'm just wondering if we can change that to side and or.
You have a motion to make then, Vicki? You have a motion to make?
Well, it's just discussion right now. I'd like to know opinions. If
How is
it's
that
just,
routinely, usually it's something in like a corner lot or something that warrants, how does that routinely handled now when a decision is made to alter the traditional one?
In town center, we've been faced with a desire not to have rear entry garages served by a lane or alley. We typically require side or rear entry garages, meaning you come off the front of the lot to either access the side entry or you go behind the house to a rear entry. But there is no alley that services the garage.
I just think aesthetically, if this is this is just in my head, in the world according to Vicky, I just think aesthetically, if we're trying to make a transition to go from town center to 3-acre lots, that it just looks nicer to have side entry or rear entry garages. So that's just my opinion, for what it's worth.
Lindsay?
So Vicki, one thing to note though is that if you go over to Viola Gill, the side entry garage actually results in the loss of green space. And I'm not saying that I disagree or anything, but you have to pave to get to the side entry. So you lose side yard in exchange for the side entry.
Get the side yard in front. Right, you just are moving the driveway.
No, you actually have to put in more concrete.
Right, but it's still, my opinion, better. If you go over to the building, right, there's a couple streets over there, like there's no crack at all right. Personal.
I'd like to hear Joe's comment on why the front.
Mr. Curtis, it was just a matter of acknowledgement that over the course of the last 5+ years, that's what we've authorized more than rear entry served by a lane. It's not the fault of the Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council in that they're ignoring the standards, but a lot of our projects have been next to existing long-established residential subdivisions, and the desire was to transition the new with the old so that there was a consistency in look. And so from the perspective of the department, that's what we've been doing, that's what's been accepted. So the feeling is that in those instances where we could and the site would allow, we could do side entry. But in most instances, we haven't. Ample room to do all three combinations.
Other part, Jim?
Joe, help me, because just adding a comma and side entry, I think, is what the motion is saying. But then it goes on and talks about the front facing. Is there additional language that needs to be built in if you add that side entry?
At first blush, I would say I think it still works, but I could certainly, if the motion is acted upon favorably, we'll verify that. In the final draft, you'll see it in the form that I think would work best based upon the application of the other requirements.
Vince?
Can we work off the premise that if Joe and the department would determine that it wouldn't work, then, and therefore would exclude it, that's acceptable to the group? Yeah. So
that's wrong.
But we can make
I
the
haven't talked
amendment
to
to include them. But if in his research is determined that it wouldn't work,
yes, but
then
he just said that we have more than ample room.
Right.
And the only reason I didn't make a motion to take front driveway off is because I don't want to tie somebody's hands.
Right.
But I also don't want somebody to come in and put in just a bunch of driveways, and it just, I mean, we have the room to make the decision here, so.
Any other comments? Stephen?
I understand the motion, I guess the amendment. We're just adding the side to the front and the rear. Is that correct?
The third option, yes.
This is the motion to amend. The motion to amend.
So we're not approving the,
No,
Okay.
this is only on the amendment.
Member Curtis?
Yes.
Member Boggess?
Yes.
Member Weiss?
Yes.
Member Dale?
Yes.
Member Marion?
Yes.
Chair Loyal?
Yes.
Member Sedlak?
Yes.
Member Helfrich? Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Hoffman?
Yes.
Council Liaison McCutcheon?
Yes.
Council Liaison Stevens?
Yes.
Any comments on now you're back to the motion as a whole, the entire document? Yes, Deborah?
Yeah, I'd like to propose another amendment that says we delete the detached garages from this proposal. It's on, yeah, it's on page 1 and it's the 3rd paragraph down. So that way there would be attached garages and not detached. So we remove the detached garages and outbuilding.
The concept is to eliminate the option of having detached garages.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, the detached is the accessory structure, not detached garage.
It says permitted buildings. And it's attached and detached garages. Am I misunderstanding something, Joe?
Yes, so the last sentence in that paragraph is the key sentence. It says residential lots may include a secondary residential unit over a garage or in a detached accessory structure. So what I think Ms. McCutcheon is asking is to eliminate the detached accessory structure.
Correct.
Correct. Is there a second to that motion?
I have a question before I
We
second
need a
it.
second first.
I'll second it.
Okay. Discussion?
I have a question. Okay. On the first sentence, it says houses and detached garages, and that's what you were talking about, right? You want the detached garages taken off of that first sentence? Okay, but the very first sentence says houses and attached and detached garages. So you're asking to remove the detached garages. That's what you're asking to remove. And then what exactly is a detached accessory structure? Is that a secondary residence?
For all intents and purposes, yes.
But if we remove the detached garage, then we also will no longer have a detached accessory. Is that correct?
No, you can have.
Like
one-
Cheryl She Shed?
Yep. Yep, a mother-in-law flat that doesn't necessarily accommodate parking of a car either as part of it or under it.
Okay, so what did I second?
So what I was really trying to get away was the detached accessory.
That you still want to allow detached garages?
No.
No, okay,
No.
so no detachment of any kind.
That's
Okay,
what she's
that's-
saying.
Thank you.
So if somebody wanted to build a house and put a horse barn out there under that, they wouldn't be allowed to have their. I mean, I just don't see any reason to take it out. If it, if a builder's going to come in and build a subdivision, they're not going to necessarily put detached garages in there because it just doesn't make sense. But if somebody wanted to buy an estate home and put it on one of these properties, then having that detached outbuilding makes total sense. So I just,
You only have an acre and a half.
Okay.
maintenance. Really.
That would meet the description of a detached accessory structure. we define structure, the city defines structure as any assemblage of materials for use or occupancy. So for all intents and purposes, you could nail 4 boards together and we could call it a structure in principle.
Michael, and then Lindsay.
So Joe, you said previously, though, there are not currently any in town center. So
No.
thus far, it has not been economically viable to really build them in town center. So we would, to Michael's point, be taking away flexibility for the future for something that isn't currently even been demonstrated to be viable in town center.
But under this,
Any further comments? Okay, let's vote then. Again, this is on the amendment dealing with detached garages. Will you call the roll for a vote?
Member Curtis?
No.
Member Bogus?
No.
Member White?
No.
Member Rosedale?
No.
said no.
No.
Thank you.
Sorry. Member Marion?
No.
Chair Loyal?
No.
Member Sedlak? Member Helfrey? Member Lee?
No.
Member Hoffman? Council Liaison McCutcheon?
Yes.
Council Liaison Stevens?
No.
Thank you, Terry.
Just one for clarification purposes. That first sentence, we're just leaving it as is. We removed the potential of that exterior. Okay. And then under permitted land uses, the only thing that we're adding is at the end of that sentence, are permitted,
But optional.
but optional. Thank you. I needed that clarification.
Click on the draw.
Again, clarification. Like, the original.
Clarification is I would not regard.
The,
Yes, back.
and we are recording
Yeah, that's
the proceedings, so we can go back and verify the maker of the motion and the second. Okay.
Vote is on the
Member Bogus?
Yes.
Member White? Member Rosedale?
Yes.
Member Marion?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Member Sedlak?
Yes.
Member Helfrey?
Yes.
Member Hoffman?
Yes.
Council Liaison McCutcheon?
Yes.
Council Liaison Stevens?
Yes.
Thank you again, Dr. Jones. Mr. Chair and members of the team, the next item on the agenda relates to the two locales that have been considered for addition to the town center boundary. On the map that is on your screens as well as projected behind you on the wall, they are alternatives A1 and A3. We again spent time discussing the characteristics of each of them. We did the tour and were able to walk extensively alternative A1 with Mr. Wittenberg and Mr. Madlinger. And then we also went to alternative A3 and did a very thorough review of the areas along Pond Road, not so much in that northeast corner, but certainly we're able to get a flavor, so to speak, of them. The map gives you the overall appearance, and we have individual aerial photography with the parcel lines overlaid on that aerial photography. The team originally had 4 locations, almost immediately eliminated 2 of them, and ultimately have reviewed the 2 that have now been described. Both Terry and I are available for any questions or comments, but the intent tonight would be to act on them as potential inclusions in the town center boundary, and then, if so, as we've talked in the past, designate them into the new transition district.
So let me clarify. The motion is first to have them in or out of the town center, and then to do what their zoning classific, or whether they be part zoned is with the new definition, or is that a joint motion in with that definition?
Well, certainly, if they are not included, there is no need to consider a land use designation.
So effectively, that's what it is. Okay. So let's get the first one. Would somebody make a motion to approve A1 so we can get it on the table?
Did I have my hand up first, or can I?
Well, I would like to get them so that we.
Well, yeah, I was going to make a motion. So,
good, thank you.
I'm not interested in adding either of these properties. I would make a motion to postpone indefinitely or remove these from the, remove them from consideration.
We have to have them up for consideration.
Well, I can make a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Yes, you can.
Okay, I'll do that. Motion to postpone indefinitely, A1 or 6A and 6B.
Let's deal with them separately if you would.
Okay.
So just A1.
Or 6A, I guess.
Right. 6.
Motion to postpone indefinitely 6A.
Is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to the motion?
Basically, it's alternative A1 to
table it to use.
Yes, if you're not interested in adding to the size of town center, this would move these off of the table.
There's been a motion to table A1. Is there a second to that motion? There's no second. Is there a motion to consider and vote A1? Stephen?
Yeah, I move that we recommend that A1 be included in the town center with the caveat that it would be categorized as the neighborhood.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second from, I'm going to give Terry the second.
I got one.
You've got you're in the minutes too much already.
Jeopardy.
Yeah.
I need more coffee.
Yeah. Just poke me. Discussion. Michael?
Okay, Joe, what's your thought? So A1, are the existing lots there fit?
I actually think when most people are talking about the transition district, this is the location they're thinking about. As you know from our tour, the area to the north is relatively flat, developable, but as you head further into the site or south, it becomes a true non-urban area. So with the use of the PRD, a reasonable density compatible with the surrounding development pattern to the north could be achieved while preserving almost half the site that's hilly, heavily wooded with mature trees.
Michael, follow up?
Everybody turn around. If you look at that lower piece, 16,936, that was not right there. A lot.
Yes, and as Mr. Madlinger mentioned when we were on the tour and then when he spoke to the team during the initial discussions of this alternative, the interest that he has had in the property from the development community has always been consolidating lots, not individual per se.
Tracks remain as is. That small lot there.
And certainly, if a developer were to come in and not include it, that would be probably the first direction the department would give them. That's a critical piece to the overall project, and you should consider it. I know Mr. Manlinger is here tonight, and if I've said something wrong about the interest, I'm sure he can correct me.
Just so that, you could have PRD, 2 lots.
From the department's perspective, and again, I hope this doesn't spoil the broth, so to speak, the best proposal is a proposal that's inclusive of almost, if not the entirety of the 5 lots, at least 4. And the more lots, the greater the tract size, I think the better the PRD would work.
And the owner of all 5 lots, these 2 gentlemen own all 5 lots, correct?
Yeah. You can go live with those 5 lots. Did you hear, the question was whether you had ownership of all 5 lots?
Okay.
Yeah, the 16936 is the 16936A. The B was where my the A is actually kind of section carved out of the field up there. When we walk around, I came around the corner, it's kind of set up in the field. So it's kind of neutral carved out. In my parents' envisioned at some point, it was to carve out an acre to have a buffer in there. They didn't know. The original rationale
Other questions or comments? Niles?
Well, I know that, we all come at this at different perspectives and such, business owners, landowners, council members, ARB, everything, but just from the council members' perspective, I have seen zero interest in the community for adding density outside of the town center for Wildwood. There were complaints on Brightleaf, and that was in town center, and people don't even like that. But there's at least an argument with that, saying, hey, that's part of our town center. We have a 68 square mile city. We have 868 of high density, in our town center, and I see no appetite in the community for expansion in Wildwood, whether it's in social media or just talking with people one-on-one. So just as a council member's perspective, just to represent the masses and represent the master plan and the green space, I can't support expanding the size of the town center. So that's my only comment.
whoever facilitator. Thank you, Dr. Jones. My apologies. I didn't mean to try and facilitate the meeting over several rounds. I was going to ask Joe if you could give me a
I think collectively we ended up with a number of about 40 total acres. And so just doing the simple math, divide it by 3, we're at 13 times 2. We get 26 home sites as a maximum. I don't know because, again, we've got required public space, as was identified by Ms. McCutcheon earlier in the meeting. We have stormwater management. We've got streets and right-of-ways. And So the number is the maximum. At the end of the day, it could be anywhere from 20 to 24. Probably that would be a good guess. Yes, and it'd be an acre, which was the desired outcome for some on the team when we discussed the transition. Your point's well taken. It's exactly what we wanted. It's an acre lot with the dimensions that meet the minimum requirements of the new transition district. So if it works, we don't need to address it.
Yeah, so I'm confused by Councilmember Stevens' comment. So alternative A1 is not currently in town center. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if we don't include it into the new designation, then what is it currently zoned as?
It's zoned non-urban residential district. It's designated under the master plan as non-urban residential area. And the only zoning district that's allowed in that land use category is the non-urban resident district. So it would stay at 3 acre density.
I see.
This would be a major change to put forward to planning and zoning and to council. So I make a motion to postpone 6A and 6B until after the public comment and just put that out there to the public and get their opinion first before we make a vote to include it in the final plan.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Discussion of the motion? Vicki?
I understand why you're saying what you're saying, but my understanding is we are just making a recommendation. Nothing we say or do here is law. It goes from us to the planning, zoning, and to the city council. So we're not, is that correct?
That's correct. The Planning and Zoning Commission under state statute will make the decision if it is to be included or not relative to the boundary in the land use category. And City Council will be asked to endorse and ratify.
So if we make our decision tonight, there's still plenty of time for public comment. It's just kind of, we're not kicking the can down the road.
No, in fact, the intent at the conclusion of our process is to take it out to the public and make available the updated plan for comment, all of its components.
Vince?
I would think that anything we approve, we should approach with the premise that P&Z as well as council will move forward with it. I don't think we should use them as our, well, if we screw it up, they'll fix it. I think that it should be the premise that they appreciate our work and they take it for that. So I don't know that we should go about it haphazardly or hastily, because of the fact that it can be filtered later.
Niles and then Lindsay.
So my feeling is that if you get public comment on these, you're going to find that the public is not supportive of this at all. And so that's my goal, is just to, you can hear from the people that they don't want to expand the size of town center. They don't want to expand density in Wildwood. And so that's my only goal with this, is to postpone it until after you hear the public comment, because I feel like when you get the public comment, it's not going to be supportive of this.
Lindsay is next.
Joe, were the adjacent landowners notified that this was up for discussion?
We notified the individuals within the boundaries, but not the surrounding property owners, no. The Again, this may be an error in the thought of the department, but you all were selected to represent the public. And you are charged with that responsibility. And ultimately, as was described, the product will go out to the public before you are discharged as completing your task. And in the past, after the open houses, the public input sessions, or whatever tool is chosen, those comments are brought back to the team, and then the team can amend the document based upon the public comment. I think the best approach, and again, this is just the Department of Planning speaking to you, is that either adopt it or don't adopt it and give them a target to shoot at, so to speak. Don't take it out with, well, we're not sure, what do you think? I think that's a disservice to the process myself, with all due respect.
Other comments?
Just to clarify,
Yes.
so the postcards went out to the property owners, but not the within 1,500 feet? Okay.
No.
Yes, Deborah?
So, Joe, if we leave alternative A1 as it is at this minute, is there any way that the density would be less than 1 house per 3 acre
No.
using a PRD?
No, again, the PRD doesn't change the density of the underlying zoning district designation. It allows flexibility in lot size, lot width, depth, and setbacks.
The motion is on to postpone discussion of this. Are there any other comments on that motion? Jim?
I'd like to just rephrase what I thought Joe said. I'm personally against the motion, and from what I heard from Joe, that there still is option for other people in public comments, January timeframe, December timeframe, whenever we take it out from this committee to public comments, for us to get those comments back. And if it is as negative as Niles says, which I personally don't think will happen, but if it is, we have the opportunity to make some changes. So, and unless we do something tonight to take this forward, we'll never do anything. It'll sit here forever. So I think we ought to go ahead and defeat the motion to postpone indefinitely, vote on the item A1 and A3, and then go forward with our process that says in the, Joe, help me, is it January, February timeframe that we'll do public comments for this committee?
That's the projected timeframe, right after the first, or at the start of the new year.
And from that, we will get feedback from the public to let us know whether we're in great shape or we're all wet.
Yeah.
So the intent would be, as part of those public input sessions or open houses or whatever format, again, we do notify the entirety of the community.
Deborah?
Yeah, Joe, since we've established this transition district, if we do not change the zoning for alternative A1, they could come back and request to change the zoning to the transition district. Is that correct?
Yes. Notwithstanding this process, individual property owners or a collection of property owners can always request for a boundary amendment to town center. Typically what they're told is, we have an update process, you'll either have to wait or participate in that. We generally don't do them on a random basis. That's what we've said in the past.
Other comments? Michael?
So, I think put forth the best site plan effort that you can come up with, and then let planning and zoning, the public, and the council decide if they want to do this.
Niles?
So my intent, Mike, on that, because so I would like to not expand the size of town center, and then even use that neighborhood edge transition to dial back the density in town center. So you could use the net neighborhood edge transition zoning for those 5 properties or 4 properties on Brown Road, and then that would be the transition right behind the workplace. Or you could use it for the far western edge of the town center district that's currently neighborhood edge and make that the net. And so it wouldn't necessarily defeat creating the net or the neighborhood edge transition. We just bring it in and have the transition be within the current boundaries of town center on those edge portions. That's what I think residents in Wildwood would go for more than expanding density would be to shrink it. So that was my goal.
Any further questions been called? Let's do this by a voice vote. All in favor of calling the question?
Point of order, this is just for my motion to postpone until after public comment so
That's
that we
correct.
can...
The question is the motion to postpone dealing with A1.
Until after public comment.
Until after public comment.
Forgive me, I thought you said postpone vote in your motion.
I did, but I think he's wanting to handle them individually.
Yeah. Our facilitator recommended do them separately.
So clarification. So I thought Councilmember Stevenson said postpone indefinitely, and no, now you're changing it?
That motion did not get a second, and so I made a subsequent motion to postpone until after public comment, because I don't think it'll be good.
So, all in favor, we'll do a voice vote on calling the question. All in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Okay, now we'll do a roll call vote on the motion to postpone until after the public comments, the decision on A1.
Member Chris.
No.
Member Bach.
No.
Member Wise.
Yes.
Member Brisdale.
No.
Member Marion.
No.
Chair Loyal.
No.
Member Sedlak.
No.
Member Helfrey. No. Member Lee.
No.
Member Hoffman.
No.
Council Liaison Ketchum.
No.
Council Liaison Stevens.
Yes.
10-2. Motion passed.
Fails. Motion
That's
failed.
to call the question.
Yeah, right.
No, that's not to call the question. That was on the motion
That was
itself.
the motion to postpone.
Right, that's all.
Public comment.
Okay.
So it failed.
It
The
fails.
motion failed.
Okay, this is now back to the overall document on this new zoning category. Any cut?
The motion on the floor is to include A1 into town center and to put it as the neighborhood edge transition district.
That's right.
That was the motion.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Thank you for that clarification.
Sorry, I was on council.
You'll be voting on whether or not to include A1 in town center with the neighborhood edge classification. Transition. I'm sorry, neighborhood transition. So that's the comment?
So I'm confused. So I thought the neighborhood edge transition district was not in town center. Is it or isn't it?
It is not at this time, but based upon Mr. Curtis's motion, if approved, alternative A1, that collection of 5 properties, would be the first to be designated under the neighborhood transition district.
So it would not be in town center.
It would be included and designated neighborhood edge transition district.
Okay, so the motion is to include it in town center.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Other comments? Mike?
Yeah, Joe, I just have a question. You had talked earlier about domino, right? And all of a sudden, this, we've talked, I think, from being out there, based on the topography, really not another domino that can go down. This guy in the town center.
I would find it very difficult and would never support adding additional town center area south of this site.
Other questions or comments? So you're ready to vote. This will be on the motion to include A1 in town center with a neighborhood transition zoning. Okay, will you call the roll?
Member Boggs.
Yes.
Member Wise.
Yes.
Member Brisdale.
Yes.
Member Marion.
Yes.
Chair Loyal.
Yes.
Member Sedlak.
Yes.
Member Helfrey.
Yes.
Member Lee.
Yes.
Member Hoffman.
Yes.
Council Liaison McCutcheon.
So while I support the net, I do not support including this in town center, so I say no.
Council Liaison Stevens.
No.
Member Curtis.
Yes.
Motion passes, okay.
The last item relative to this particular matter is alternative A3. Again, there was discussion of it being included into the town center boundary. Currently, it is not, and potentially applying the neighborhood edge transition district to that collection of properties, so designated alternative A3.
I'm turning to you now as to whether you want to make your motion.
Motion to postpone indefinitely.
Is there a second to that motion? Motion dies for lack of a second. Is there a motion to put this on the table for discussion and a vote?
I'll make the same motion that it be included, that we recommend that it be included in the town center with the caveat that it must come in as neighborhood edge transition district.
Is there a second to that motion? Secretary seconds it. Okay, discussion? Vince?
Are the property owners for this, I mean, not the commercial ones, but the other, are they here? Are they?
They are not. Mr. Danielle did attend one of our meetings, and that was a meeting when we first introduced the alternatives and was supportive. Mr. Danielle and his family owns the 33-acre tract of land that comprises much of the area. As we've talked, several of the properties, such as Happy Hounds, already is at a higher level of development than would be considered in the neighborhood ed transition district. There's a church with cemetery. And so really, there's two property owners that have small houses that front onto Manchester Road that have not yet been contacted. But again, their lots are relatively small in size.
Did they receive the initial postcards when we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Jim?
I'm going to dovetail on to Mike's question about the domino effect. I think what I had heard you say, that doesn't really apply because of the church to the west and to the middle school to the west. So I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but do you see that as a potential problem? You didn't call it domino effect, you call it something else, but that's my question.
Mr. Boggess, between Route 100 to the north, two established and long-standing institutional uses to the west, and the rest of the area on the surrounding two sides being already in town center? No.
Yes, Judge Steve?
Could you just remind me about the number of units that they originally proposed versus what this designation would do?
Well, if we're discussing the 33-acre tract of land, Payne Family Homes at one time had proposed an acre, 1 unit per acre density. And so in that case, at 33 acres, there would have been potentially 33 home sites with dwellings on each of them. Under this proposal, there'll be 22 at the maximum. Again, dividing 3 into 33 and then multiplying by 2.
Any other questions or comments? Ready to vote. Terry, will you call the roll?
Member Boggs.
Yes.
Member White.
Yes.
Member Brisdale.
Yes.
Member Marion.
Yes.
Chair Loyal.
No.
Member Sedlak.
Yes.
Member Helfrey. Member Lee.
Yes.
Member Hoffman.
Yes.
Council Liaison McCutcheon.
No.
Council Liaison Stevens.
No.
Member Curtis.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 7. Does any team member have a question or comment about the information provided to date? Vicki?
Question. When Mr. Stevens was talking about his vision of rezoning within town center, kind of to neighborhood edge transition, right? So I guess my question is, how does that work if you were to rezone something that's already zoned a certain way? How difficult is that to do, and how does the city go about doing that?
In preparation for our next meeting, it is the intent of the department to mail a postcard to all property owners within the boundary of town center, advising them that our next couple of meetings we will be discussing changes to the regulating plan or no changes to the regulating plan. That would be the time to hear from the public about, do they like what they have, or do they think they should have something else? It would also be the time for the team to talk about potential changes. If there's trends they've seen through the last 10 years of the application of the plan and its land use categories that have not been successful, this would be the time to discuss it.
Let's see, and then Deborah.
Joe, have you ever historically seen an area go from more dense to less dense? And if so, how would that affect the existing property owners?
Well, certainly anytime you, so to speak, downzone or reduce the level of development potential, there's always the risk that you can be called out as a taking without appropriate compensation. It's not done very often, and typically it's done in conjunction with the owner, and hopefully the rationales the owners provided are appropriate enough to see the benefit to the property, their ownership, and the community around it. It's very seldom.
Deborah, and then Michael, and then Terry.
So regarding the mailing, did you say it was only going to go to residents in the town center?
Well, those are the ones that are designated under the regulating plan. So we always give first opportunity to those, so to speak, that are impacted by the plan to comment on the plan, and then thereafter again, the intent would be then to notify everybody in the community, these are the proposed changes, these are the steps we've taken, what do you think? So there'll be an opportunity to hear from all parties at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Joe, with thought circulating.
Certainly. We'll have that ready for the next meeting.
Okay. Terry?
Do we need to have anything in the record that alternate A2 was not considered?
Actually, at an earlier meeting, we eliminated alternative A2 and alternative B.
Okay.
So it's part of the record already, but it was very early on.
Okay.
Vince?
Just wanted to let the team know that since our last meeting, I was contacted by a property owner of 3 parcels of land adjacent to the Reserve Ackerley development. I contacted Joe to see if it would be appropriate for me to have that conversation, and he said as chair it would be. As it turns out, they had a conflict in time, they were going out of town, so I have not had that conversation, but I wanted to let the team know that I had been contacted by a property owner. I don't know what their intent is. I certainly will invite them to come and participate in the process, but I did want them to know that they made direct. Part of the reason is apparently they have an acquaintance with my wife from previous work or whatever, so that they just took advantage of that. But I did want to let you know that I was contacted by someone that's not directly impacted right now, other than they're in town center and they border the Ackerley Reserve property. So,
Any other questions or items under agenda item 7? Are there any final public comments? Any other items that any member of the team would like to bring to the attention of the other members of the team or to Joe, or that Joe would like to bring to the attention of the team members?
It's very brief, Dr. Jones. First of all, thank you for your attendance tonight. I say to our boards and commissions and others, we can't do it without you, so your attendance is very valuable and we do appreciate it. And when you leave tonight, know that we accomplished a lot tonight. It may not necessarily be exactly what you wanted, but you worked hard to get to the end product, and we thank you for that.
Anybody else have a comment?
I would just echo Joe's sentiments about appreciate everyone's beneficial and productive conversation and the participation. Thank you.
So the next meeting date will be November 5th. Is there a motion to adjourn? And seconded? In discussion? No? Without objection, the team is